bear with us and we'll move forward as that happens. So just give us a few minutes.
The meeting has not started, but they're not saying anything.
Thank all of our guests for waiting around on us. It took us a little longer than normal through lunchtime, but we've worked diligently to get to this point. As I explained earlier, Mr. Webster mentioned before we went into executive session, the members of the commission have independently nominated applicants in each license category for consideration as receiving a license award. The members of the commission will now submit their sealed nominations to the staff, who will compile the nominations and report the compiled results back to the commission for consideration. So, commission members, if you have finished your tabulations as you see fit on your ballot, please remit to Mr. McMillan. Ms. Peters will retire and take Agent Dion Robinson with her, and they will go and be going over the process of applicants nominated. While they've been dispatched to do that overview and tabulate, I'd like to remind all of us that our members of the commission have had full access to all applications since late March and have had access to the recalculated scores, evaluator qualifications, the pass, fail items, the background checks, and other information that is deemed appropriate in the awarding of licenses. Our rules are clear that the commission remains the primary decision maker with regard to the licensing and has authority to act independently of any third-party evaluation and their recommendation. This means that the commission has discretion to act consistently with such evaluation and recommendations, to differently weigh the factors contained within such evaluation and recommendations, or to apply different factors and issue licenses based on reasons not considered by the third party, but upon such other factors as the commission, in its discretion and in accordance with law, may deem appropriate. Therefore, all 90 applications that were deemed submitted by the commission were under consideration by the commission members when making their nominations. To take up some time while we're waiting on the results of our tabulators, we've got some guests with us today. I'm going to introduce our guest with us today who you might want to hear from. To begin with, I'll introduce Ms. Lynn Chronister. She is the Vice President of Research and Economic Development at USA, University of South Alabama. With her also is Kristen Roberts, the Financial Officer for University of South Alabama. Those two ladies will give a presentation on how the University of South Alabama operated in the evaluator process. We also have with us from KPMG, our extra outside auditor, Mr. Keith Sherbert, who is a partner with KPMG. Also, we have Brittany McAllister. Y'all raise your hand while I'm calling your name. Thank you, Brittany. Brittany's hiding in the corner. Brittany McAllister, she's Director of Financial Compliance at USA. Kristen Dukes, General Counsel for University of South Alabama, also sitting over here in the corner. And Dr. Misty Sable, the Assistant Professor of Statistics at University of South Alabama. Thank you, Misty. So we've got University of South Alabama represented well today, and they have done a ton of work for the commission. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lynn Chronister to give a brief overview of how USA operated. So if you'll turn your attention to her. Thank you for coming, Lynn.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon. Yes, I am Lynn Chronister, and I do serve the University of South Alabama as Vice President for Research and Economic Development. Do we have our slides available?
Scott, do we have the slides?
Wonderful. Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much.
See if there's a mic over there.
And so today we've been asked and are very pleased to provide you some information. First, on the process for selection and of the actual evaluators, and secondly, information on the internal and thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. KP.
Hey. He's getting you some slides. There you go.
Hey, that's his.
That's my mic.
Oh.
Hold it all you want.
I thought we had a microphone. We thought we had a microphone, Lynn. I'm sorry about that.
It was a wonderful idea, and thank you. Oh, yes, I'll come over here. please, I do understand I have a very soft voice. I carry a big stick. No, I'll stand. Thank you. So, today I am going to provide you some information on the selection of the evaluators. And my colleague, Kristen Roberts, who is our Chief Financial Officer, will be providing you with additional information on the internal and KPMG audit that we carried out. First, I want to mention that we had over 15,000 calculations of 10,700 data points that we gathered. In the process of ranking the license applications, out of those 15,000 calculations, human errors were made. Those errors resulted in the impact on one of the previously awarded licenses. And Kristen will go into that in more details. Do you have that? Thank you. So, next slide. Thank you. So the first step that USA took was to widely disseminate a request for evaluators. And once we got the request for the evaluators, once those started coming in, we received 200 statements of interest. Of those 200, we received back 113 completed applications. It was a two-step process. Those 130 potential evaluators were required to provide to us a conflict of interest statement saying that they did not have a conflict of interest in evaluating these license agreements. Secondly, a non-disclosure agreement that they would not talk about it to anyone at any time outside of the individuals involved in the process. We requested a document on qualifying information and also a resume. So to summarize, we had extensive biographical information on each of the applicants. We had demographic information on each of the applicants, including residency, gender, race, and other additional information. And at the same time, we asked each of the potential evaluators what they felt qualified to review and what they were willing to review. And so at the next step, the evaluator information was placed into a grid, and I was in charge of that particular part of the process. We completed the grid, and also went back to others at the University of South Alabama who were involved in it, and we double-checked to make sure that we felt comfortable with the evaluators. We had 64 evaluators at the end of the process, out of that 113 who had applied. So we were very careful about who we chose as evaluators, or who we recommended as evaluators. So once the University of South Alabama had completed that grid, we made those recommendations to the AMCC staff. The staff had additional information that we did not have, and they did the final approval. The selected evaluators were then put through 2 live trainings and provided with an extensive handbook. A little bit of information on the qualifications of the evaluators that were chosen. More than half of the evaluators had master's degrees or higher. 14 had doctoral degrees, 4 had JDs, and 1 had an MD. All of the evaluators had more than 5 years of relevant experience, and most had more than 15 to 20 years, many with 30 to 40 years of experience. So we felt comfortable that the evaluators who were selected were extremely well qualified. Now, our second point is there were human errors made, and Kristen Roberts is going to walk you through the process that we use to identify and rectify those. Thank you.
Hey there. All right, so next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to speak to the procedures that we performed at the University of South Alabama along with our work that we engaged KPMG with. So first of all, just to kind of outline the timeline, USA was notified of a score calculation variance in June 2023. We had 2 high-level accountants in USA Finance and Administration, I talk with my hands, completely independent of one another, that recalculated all 90 applicant scores. I want to emphasize that these accountants were completely independent of the project itself, and they worked completely independent of one another. Further to that point, 90 applicants is a lot to score, but I want to emphasize the 2 bullet points under that. We had almost 11,000 data points to assess and to organize, and almost 15,000 calculations to determine the final scores that went with these rankings. The recalculated scores were compared then to the scores that were initially submitted to the commission. Variances were noted and reviewed. Simultaneously to our 2 accountants internally USA doing their analysis, we engaged with KPMG to perform agreed upon procedures to validate our recalculated scores. Through the scoping phase that KPMG did in those agreed upon procedures, it was noted that both KPMG and both internal recalculations identified the same variances. So I want to emphasize that. We had 2 independent CPAs at the University of South Alabama, and KPMG in their scoping of that found the exact same errors. So we feel very confident we have identified all errors. Next slide. The findings, internal procedures, and recalculated scores, the rankings, and the identified discrepancies were all presented to our project lead, who then reviewed the information and confirmed the revised data set to be accurate. That revised data set was then provided to KPMG to perform their agreed upon procedures, which included another independent recalculation of the scores. KPMG performed their agreed upon procedures, noting no variances, no exceptions from the 2 independent recalculations performed by the University of South Alabama. I want to take a minute.
Either you call me or something else. Y'all got my side. So keep this up. You call me that
Somebody needs to give me a call. As a disclaimer, you'll see this on the slide. We did not review any of the evaluator selection qualifications or basis for how the evaluators determined those raw scores submitted. That meaning that we did not rescore anything. We retabulated the scores that the evaluators initially submitted. To go over the results that we found, variances between the recalculated score and the initial scores provided to the commission were noted. While there were variances that did affect applicant scores, only some affected applicant rankings. The first error that was found was the initial error, which we call the offsetting error. This was an initial variance in the integrated facility panel type, where one evaluator duplicated their score by entering that scorecard twice. The additional score caused what we are calling a trickle-down effect in the calculation of the averages of all scores below that on the spreadsheet. And I know that's kind of hard to not visually see, but we had one evaluator hit that button to submit the scorecard twice, so then from that point on in the spreadsheet, as we were summing and averaging those applicant scores, it was picking up the wrong 2 numbers. The second error is an incorrect weight that was applied to the raw scores. This did not affect rankings, as it was consistently applied to all applicant scores. In the processor and dispensary categories, that was an issue where we used the incorrect weight of 3 instead of 2 as we were multiplying out the weighted scores for each category type for each applicant. In the secure transporter panel type, that was an issue where there was a sum of a +3 instead of a multiplicative of a 3. Again, All of that was consistently applied to all applicant scores, so that did not affect rankings. Another error that was found was that as we pulled down the data for the processor license panel, it was exported by evaluator ID rather than the application ID. So this caused scores for different applicants rather than different evaluators to be averaged together. An example of that is you'll see this happened applicant 1, evaluator A was averaged with applicant 2, evaluator A, where it should have been applicant 1, evaluator A, applicant 1, evaluator B. Another error that was found were miskeys by the evaluators themselves, and a good example of this is a misalignment of a qualitative and a quantitative score that was given. So an example would be, and this is extreme, but if I gave you a score of 100, but I gave you an unacceptable qualitative score, that would be a misalignment. And so we identified all of those that were inconsistent. Additional contact was made with those evaluators to clarify which one was correct or if that was in fact how they intended to submit their scorecard. Ultimately, we received feedback from all evaluators except for one evaluator on 2 applications and 1 exhibit for each application. And then finally, data entry errors, and this is just, to be quite frank, human error because of some of the initial miskeys that some of these evaluators had. They emailed corrections, and in those 15,000 pieces of data that were combined to get the correct scoring, some of the received data that was input into the scoring spreadsheet was simply applied to the incorrect applicant and or evaluator. So it could have been typed into row 10 instead of row 9 as it was keyed. I want to emphasize that all of these variances were corrected by the University of South Alabama and have been independently verified by KPMG. And we have full confidence in the data set that has been provided to the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
And Lynn, we appreciate you being here today, and that was a wonderful presentation. A lot of questions were answered. I believe you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make one comment.
Yes, sir.
We see an example that professionals can make mistakes.
Absolutely. Well, that was why that's why they were brought in today, to try to bring clarity as to where we are in the tabulation process, and I think they've done an admirable job. And we're on better footing now than we were a few weeks ago. So I think we need to recess. In light of the fact we don't yet have our tabulated numbers back from Brittany and Dion, we're going to go into a brief recess for the commission. All of you can stay. It should not be long, but we need to wait and have those numbers back. We don't know how long that may take, but just sit tight and we'll reconvene shortly. So we'll be adjourned temporarily. Recessed, I'm sorry. Learn my terminology.